It's Deplorable Radio with Dave Carter.
Pat Sajak is a household name, an iconic entertainer, a supporter of conservative causes. Lucky for us, he's also a contributor at Ricochet. And lucky for me, he's my guest today. I am Dave Carter. This is Radio Deplorable, brought to you by Simply Safe, about which more in due course, and by the good graces and seemingly infinite patience of the good folks at Ricochet.com. And I'm delighted to welcome to the program the aforementioned Pat Sajak. How you doing, Pat?
It's great to be with you, Dave. I'm great, and your piano playing is fabulous.
Sounds like we're sitting at a piano bar, doesn't it?
It does. I think I'll order a drink. Unfortunately, there's no one here to order from.
I have my medicine cabinets in the back room. I'll get you a fresh scotch if you want. So,
yeah, or Listerine, either one.
Okay, all right. One of the goals of this podcast is to benefit from the perspective of the people between the East and West Coast. You know, the folks that get up before sunup each morning, toss back a coffee, get to work. They're producing goods, moving goods to store shelves, that kind of thing.
You mean people who do something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure has listeners saying, okay, so why do we have an iconic celebrity on the West Coast? But I've got an answer for that. And it harkens back to our first conversation. If I remember correctly, of course, you can correct me, but if I remember, you mentioned that some of the hardest work that you did as a young man was working on a truck dock, I believe with your dad. Did I get that right?
Yeah, my father was worked for Hennis Freight Lines, which I don't think exists any longer. But we grew up in a sort of industrial part of Chicago, and the freight line company was just a couple of blocks away. My father walked to work, and he worked on the dock outside in the cold and heat of Chicago, loading trucks and unloading trucks. It was a truck transfer place, essentially. And for those who don't know, it sounds strange, but you would take stuff off one truck, move it across the dock, and
right.
Put it on another truck.
I've been to many of those.
I have a hunch there might have been some Teamster involvement in that. I'm not sure. Well, my dad was a Teamster, and you know it's you know how it is when you're a kid. Your father goes to work, and then he comes home and he complains that he's tired, and you don't want to hear it, and your teenagers don't appreciate that kind of stuff. And
sure.
Even though you're in a working class neighborhood and you have working class friends, work is still sort of this concept, And one summer, I was talking about making some money, and my dad said, I think I can get you some
hook you
work.
up with that, huh?
And yeah, and I remember the first day when there was a semi full of boxes of folded up Coca-Cola cartons, the six packs come
sure.
in, and there was a couple hundred in a box,
right.
and the box filled this truck. And my job that day, I had a dolly and a back, and my job was to take it was me alone to take all of those cartons off this one truck, move them across the dock, and load them onto another truck. Well, I had no idea how enormous these things are until you're inside one. I mean,
right.
It was longer than my house. I paced it off later. It literally was.
Yeah.
And I worked some that summer, and I realized, first of all, a great appreciation for what he was doing, sending this ungrateful kid and other kids to school and, buying them clothes and putting food on the table. And he was doing this every day. And I thought, so, to this day, people will, Wheel of Fortune's been on a long time, and people will say, how do you do this for 30 years? I said, ask my father, how did he do that for 30 years?
Well, that's great, yeah.
This is easy. They send cars for me, and they treat me well, and they pay me ridiculously well, and it's all wonderful. But there's just no comparison. I mean, how do you get up in the morning and say, okay, I'm off to to transfer loads again today? It may be 12 degrees, but that's okay because we got to feed these folks. So it really was an eye opener in a lot of ways, and I have to say it also confirmed to me that maybe I need to find something softer to do. This is real work. And you mentioned flyover country, Dave,
right.
and in my business, and look, there are a lot of people like me in my business. They came from much more humble beginnings. But I'll tell you, this is really a difficult business in which to keep your balance, because things are done for you, and people are nicer to you than you probably deserve, and they let you get away with stuff they wouldn't let other people get away with. And pretty soon, it's real easy to make you believe that it's kind of your birthright, that you are somehow special because you're on television or on the radio. And, it's your job, for goodness sakes. And there's nothing about, because you're a movie actor and you play a couple roles doesn't make you brilliant. Because you played the president doesn't make you presidential. But it's real easy to lose sight of that fact. And one of the things that's allowed me to not lose sight of it is the nature of our show. I mean, we call ourselves America's Game, and it's really more than a slogan. I mean, we really do make an effort. We have taped in every major city in this country. Our people find contestants in every city in this country. They're always traveling around. We purposely try not to be this West Coast / East Coast show. There's a great nation there, and I fly over it a lot, but I also land in these places too.
Sure.
And it does keep your balance a little bit.
Well, I want to dwell on that a little bit later as well on the show. But how old were you, getting back to that doc that you love so much?
I was, I'm trying to think about it. I was in high school, early high school.
Okay.
So, I was 14, 15 years old, and I could have been 16. It's hard to remember exactly which summer that was. But, I was that age where this is not what a teenage boy wants to be doing during the summer. And it can get warm and a little humid there as well. But the guys were nice to me. They treated me well, and they knew I was Bill's son. It was actually my stepfather. A little family history. My parents were divorced fairly early in my life. I was about 10 or 11 years old, and back then that was a little more unusual than it is today. A lot more unusual. So I felt a little odd about that. Everyone else had two, parents running around, and that was kind of difficult. And then my mother remarried, and the man I'm talking about was really my stepfather, but they were married for 35 years before he passed away, and so I thought of him as my father. But he said that they would. So I was Bill Backel's son. His name was Backel, and William Backel, and but they treated me okay. It was the docs can be pretty tough for a young guy. You go in there, and Not that we didn't use salty language in high school, but it was a little different atmosphere, and they would kid you a little bit and haze you a little bit.
Sure.
But it was a nice growing up experience, and I would just come home beat. And so from that point on, when my father came home, can I get you some slippers? I mean, I understood what he was going.
Right. I was just out of high school and moved in with my dad. And he and I, because that side of the family had kind of fallen on hard times, and he and I worked for a temp agency for a while, and they sent us out to the port of Panama City, Florida, where these trucks would come in with these front to back loads of 100-pound bags of, I guess they were rotten peanuts, and our job was to take the knives and slice open the bag at the tailgate, dump it on the ground, and get some more bags and bring them back. Well, the first few rows of bags are pretty easy. Then you've got to start walking further back in that beast and hauling that stuff all the way 53 feet back to the tailgate. And by the time it's done, you're absolutely exhausted. So I thought I need to find a different line of work too.
Yeah, exactly.
So we went to landscaping.
So I admire people who do that. And there are, I'm surrounded by people, and I'm myself included, who, we don't work much with our hands. I'm not sure I could build anything anymore. I mean, I can use a screwdriver and a hammer, and I can, do a couple of things. But I just have just great admiration for people who do things. And I'm not knocking people who we need insurance agents and we need lawyers, I guess. And
some of them.
We need people in cubicles, and I understand all that, and those jobs have their own challenges, I understand. But there are fewer and fewer people who do things manually, and the kind of craftsmen that were common when I was growing up are becoming less so. And so I have great admiration for people who can actually do something. And there, by the way, if I'm if I'm trapped out in the forest with someone, they're the people I want to be with.
Right.
I don't necessarily want to be with a really good insurance salesman.
Did you ever get the chance to ride in any of those trucks that came in?
No, I didn't. That's one thing I didn't get to do. It's funny.
Well, if you're ever in Memphis, I know a truck driver.
I beg your pardon?
If you're ever in Memphis, I know a truck driver.
Yeah, well, I never. I've not at that time. I have since, sat next to a driver a couple of times to see what it feels like. But no, at the time I was not. I was not allowed up front. I was strictly in through the back door.
I worked as a security guard a few years later at a chemical plant, and I would check all the trucks that came in. And one of the guys said, "You really like this truck, don't you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Hop in." And so I got permission, and we rode around the plant, and he brought me back. I thought it was the coolest thing. So, of course, immediately when I retired from the Air Force, I went to a truck.
There you go. Well, my wife has this secret desire, not so secret. She talks about it all the time. She said, "That's really what I want to do." I said, "No, you don't." Yeah, she said, "Yes, I want to drive. I'm going to be a truck driver." I said, "I think it's too late to start."
It's kind of a Spartan existence, you know.
Yeah, it seems. There's a depending on how you look at it, there is kind of a romantic appeal to it. And I'm sure a lot of truck drivers would scoff at that notion, perhaps.
No, it's true. But it's true. There is to some extent. And you feel like you're, the captain of your own destiny until the dispatcher calls, then you realize you're not.
But it is it's one of the last vestiges of that sort of individualism, right. Where it's your own ship, and you're. I mean, I know you're not keeping your own schedule. There's schedules you have to keep and all that, but there is a kind of independence, at least to the outsider. It seems that way.
And for a lot of people such as myself and you as well, that are veterans. It's like being deployed. You leave home, you pack up your stuff, and you have a mission. Get yonder load of stuff from point A to point B. Don't hurt anybody, and you're done. So there's a big appeal. A lot of veterans go into trucking as well.
Another thing that happened when I was around trucks growing up is I began to notice, because I, like a lot of people, be on the road, and I would think, those darn trucks, look what they're doing and messing up traffic, and they're cutting me off and blah. And I started to see what drivers do to truck drivers and the situations they put them in, and how difficult it is, to stop one of those things. You can't stop them in 6 feet, and so I'm, to this day, when I'm on the freeway, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that family just cut that driver off again. They're lucky they're alive, and it wouldn't have been his fault had it happened. So it's I gained a lot of appreciation for what you do.
It does help in Memphis. I've become a professor of genealogy when people cut me off. I know things about their parents that they had no clue about. Now, we'll switch topics here for just a moment, but if I read correctly, you were in the Army at one point, right?
I was. I joined the Army. I finished 3 years of college in Chicago, and I started the fourth year, and it just wasn't feeling like much was happening. I was not the most devoted student in the world, and I joined the Army. It was it was 1968, right at the height of the Vietnam buildup, and I thought there was probably a pretty good chance that's where I would end up, and in fact I did. But yeah, I was in for 3 years, and like the summer on the dock, it was it's a maturing experience. I don't have to tell you what the military can do. And in terms of changing your view of the world and changing the way you approach things. At the time, you're grousing about the food or this, or I'm going to a war zone, what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. But, as you look back, you realize what the positive impacts that can have on you as well. So that was a real life changer for me.
Oh, yeah. And I've noticed that when veterans are talking with each other and they're telling stories / lies, if anybody can tell the difference sometimes, but they typically... when they're talking about their days in uniform, they will steer away from the more morbid aspects of service, and they go into the humorous episodes from their time on active duty.
That's absolutely true. My stepfather, my father, the one who stuck me on this dock. Notice how I'm changing my approach here.
Yeah. The revered gentleman that stuck you on the dock.
He served in World War II, and like a lot of veterans, particularly of that war, never talked about it. And not that he not that it was this great scar that he was carrying around, but he just never much talked about it. It was only in his later years that I learned a little bit more about what he did and what he went through. And for a lot of these guys, there was the feeling was, hey, I did what millions of other people did, and I did my duty, and I did it to the best of my ability, and I've moved on now. And it's not as if they're ashamed of their service.
Right,
It's not as
right.
necessarily they've been scarred by it, although some were obviously. But it's that it's part of what I did. I mean, it was part of me being an American and being patriotic and whatever it was. And they didn't necessarily dwell on it later in life, but I did get some things out of him and learned a little bit about that as well. And things I never knew. I just saw a couple of pictures of him in uniform and thought it was cool, and that was
Right.
about it. He rarely talked about it.
My great uncle was part of the folks that liberated some of the concentration camps. He absolutely would not talk about it. He didn't want to watch any television shows about it. He didn't want to see any pictures, any books. He said, "No,
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've seen more than I ever wanted to see. Let me tell you about something else." And we hear all the funny stuff,
Yeah, I mean those are different stories. I mean, because there were so many people went through some horrific things, and that's a different. I don't want to talk about it because it was horrific, and I don't need to relive it, and it was terrible, and I'd rather move on to something else now. Those things are difficult to deal with. But And then my brother served shortly after I did, and he was drafted and spent a couple of years in Vietnam. Spent a year in Vietnam as well. Mm-hmm. So there was a little military history in my family. But when I was through with Vietnam, I finished up actually in Washington D.C. I worked at the Pentagon for the last 9 months or so, which is a little different from being in Saigon.
Tried to talk some sense into them.
No, there was no point.
Well, that's true. That's true. Do you have any particular favorite funny stories? Anything that happened while you were in?
Well, I had a strange military career because I joined and they sent me to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri,
mm-hmm.
Decided they were going to. And I, by the way, when I joined, I thought, I've already had some civilian radio experience. I'll probably be in Armed Forces Radio, and that's sort of what I requested. And their answer to my request was they sent me to Fort Leonard Wood to make me a clerk typist,
Wow.
That's what I became. And then I was sent to Vietnam, having learned to be a clerk typist, and they assigned me to a finance unit about 30 miles outside Saigon, and said, "You're now a finance clerk. Learn to be a finance clerk," which the military works in mysterious ways.
Right.
In which I did, and I became a pretty good one. But I kept trying to transfer to Armed Forces Radio, and I finally, after months of and repeated attempts, for some reason it sneaked through one day, and I was transferred to Saigon, and I was the Good Morning Vietnam guy for about a year and a half, which is if you have to be in a war zone, that's not bad duty.
So you were sitting in finance, typing and announcing the time of the temperature, and they finally said, "All right, we'll send him over then."
We got to do something with him. Man, it's going nuts. But that was interesting duty because you're there, you're in the military, and you're not in a way. I mean, because when you're on the air, you're trying to make it. You want all the guys who are listening to forget about the military for a moment, be entertained, and so you treat it. If you listen to our station, other than the quote commercials were about keeping your M16 clean and mm-hmm. things like that. Mm-hmm. They all were produced in a way that you could have been listening to a rock and roll station in the States, and that we did that on purpose. I did
a year in Korea from 1994 to 1995, and we had an Armed Forces station on base. And you're right, you're exactly right. It was like listening to a station back home. Aside from the little announcements on the thing, you wouldn't know that it was a military operation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it was great. It was great fun, and I was playing records, and there was a war going on. And when you left the studio, there were barbed wire and tanks and armored personnel carriers outside and all that stuff. But the human being is an adaptable animal, and you're there for a while, and it all kind of seemed normal. I've never been back, which is people ask that a lot, and But I remember thinking, looking around Saigon, I thought, this would be a very pretty city if it weren't for all the barbed wire.
Right. I understand. We are talking with Pat Sajak. We'll have some questions about Wheel of Fortune, some other things coming right up.
I feel pretty, oh so pretty. I feel pretty and witty and bright. And I'm pretty, any boy who isn't me tonight. I feel charming, oh so charming. It's alarming how charming I feel. It's so pretty that I can hardly believe that I'm real. See the pretty boy in the mirror there, who can have an attractive got me. Such a pretty face, such a pretty face, such a pretty smile, such a pretty thing, baby. I feel started and enchanted, feel like running and dancing for joy, for I'm in love like a pretty, wonderful boy. Shut up.
It's Deplorable Radio with Dave Carter.
It sounds a little like the blues, doesn't it? Lord have mercy. I got a question for you. How much is your peace of mind worth to you? Just a couple of years ago, if you wanted to protect your family, you had to spend a lot of money on a lot of complicated products. You'd be forced into a long-term contract protecting your family with a tangled mess of wires, buttons, levers, all kinds of junk. It was complicated and it was expensive. Well, thanks to the folks at Simply Safe, protecting your family is now, well, simple. They're blowing the roof off the home security industry. Simply Safe takes all the elements of good home security, streamlines them into one amazing system, 24/7 monitoring, powerful sensors, and a high-definition camera. In the event of a break-in, this camera automatically starts recording. You'll get cold, hard evidence for the police sent right to your smartphone, plus live stream high-definition footage literally any time you want it. Go to simplysafe.com/ricochet right now. You can get the special 10% discount. That's spelled SIMPLISAFE.com, simplysafe.com/ricochet. Check it out. We're talking with Pat Sajak. I got to confess something to you, Pat.
Okay.
Since I've come to know you, it's been increasingly difficult for me to walk by one of those Wheel of Fortune gaming thingamabobs in all the casinos that I haven't visited a lot of them, but they're all over the place. I've persevered so far. I haven't donated to the cause, but it's not easy.
Well, I have a confession to make. I don't make a nickel from
Oh, you're kidding me.
No. Otherwise, I'd encourage you to gamble as much as I could. But they are everywhere. I'm not in casinos very often, but when you walk through, you keep hearing. I think like I'm at work. You keep hearing that little ding-a-ling sound.
Right.
And yeah, I guess a lot of people play it, and I think it's been very successful, but it hasn't helped my bank account at all.
Oh, you and Vanna are just beaming at me serenely from every corner of the place. I thought surely you got something off of it. Wow, okay.
Well, I mean, I think initially there was some fee to put our picture on it or something like that. Yeah. But it's not as if every time you put $1 in, I get 3 cents. Although
it doesn't go cha-ching.
Yeah, okay. It doesn't go to. Yeah, that's a sad story.
How long has Wheel of Fortune been on the air?
It's had a strange history. It's actually been on the air for just about 40 years now, because it started in the mid 70s, maybe 70, well, maybe 74, 75 now that I think about it. Anyway, it started on NBC as a daytime show with Chuck Woolery.
Oh, okay.
And he did it for 7 years, and then I think there was some contract dispute or something. And anyway, in 81, they were looking for a new host, and I ended up getting the job. And it was, when I took over in 81, it was, again, strictly a daytime show. And honestly, I had no intention of doing a game show. I was working in local TV in L.A., and the only reason I took it, first of all, was Merv Griffin produced it, and I had great respect for him, and I was flattered that he wanted me to do it. But I didn't want to do a game show, but I thought, I'm doing local TV. The show, as I said, been on for 7 years, and it appeared to have been kind of run its course. It was very popular for a few years, and it appeared to be fading. And it was at that time there were basically 3 networks. We didn't have all this cable stuff and all that. And Wheel was finishing in 3rd place in its time slot behind Price is Right. And that was Wheel was on NBC, Price is Right was on CBS, and on ABC was Love Boat reruns during the day, and it was finishing 3rd to those. So my feeling was that I would do the show for a year or two. It would go away, and I would have established a little national credibility and move on to something else. Well, it kind of got a second wind, and then in '83 they started this nighttime version that we all know now, and it went through the roof for some reason immediately. And so the nighttime show, which is sort of the one that everyone thinks about, has been on since the fall of '83. So we're moving into our 35th season, which is amazing because I'm only 22 years older than when I started. I don't know how that math works, but it's amazing.
My grandfather stayed 27 forever. I remember I passed him up, and he was still 27, so I remember very well.
So yeah, it's been there forever, and it still does very, very well. I mean, everybody is down from their peak because there are so many more options now for things to watch.
Sure.
But on a relative basis, we're still top dog in the syndicated television business, and still doing very well. It may be the show that never goes away. I'll go away before the show does.
I've been struck by the cross section. So many people from so many different walks of life. Almost every truck stop I would go to in the evening, that the show was playing, and without going, I will go into a little bit of detail. But I have a dear friend, as you know, who lost his mother several years ago. Yep. She was a dear, dear, radiant lady, and she was a devoted fan of the show. And I want you to know that the courtesies that you extended to my friend Paul meant a great deal to him, something he will never forget, nor will I, for that matter. And I got a feeling that his is not the only life that you touched in a positive and meaningful way. So how has interacting with these people for all these years affected you?
I'll tell you something. As you get older and as you've done it for longer and longer, you gain a greater appreciation of that. I mean, look, let's face it, we're playing hangman and giving away money. And that's what it is. Yeah. But this show, for some reason, and I don't know if it's because it's at the dinner hour, I don't know because it's family friendly. I leave the analysis to others. But I do know that it impacts people's lives in ways that go way beyond its parts. I mean, the sum is amazing. Hardly a day goes by where someone doesn't come up to me in a grocery store, a parking lot, or somewhere, and tell me some story about, like you told me about your friend and his mother. That a lot of the boy, I grew up watching this with my mother, and now I'm watching it with my kids. There's something bonding about it that, frankly, is not something we were aiming for. We just wanted to be entertaining and have a successful show. But it's an important part of people's lives. And even if they don't watch it every day, it's kind of like the sunset. Even if you don't go out and watch it out there, and it's incredible to me the impact it's had on people. And that has an impact on you. I mean, I take my job very seriously, and I'm I try to be glib and have fun with it and make jokes and all that stuff. But I know that it's important to people, that half hour, and I always give it my all, and I take it seriously, and I care about the people who play it. Boy, I sound like a really nice guy, don't I? But
it's that scotch from the piano bar.
Hokey. There's something hokey about the whole thing, and I mean that in the best sense of the word. It's kind of a throwback. If I went in to pitch Wheel of Fortune to a network executive today, I would be laughed out of the room. They'd go, "Wait a minute, you're playing hangman, you're spinning a wheel, okay? Is there an R? No, I'm going to spin again." And they'll say, "That's it? That's the game?" And yet here we are, 35 years later, and this show means a lot to people. So it's been transforming for me in a lot of ways. Obviously, it's allowed me to do things because of a financial windfall of a show like this that's been on so long. But it's also it just given me a greater appreciation of this country and its people. I mean, these are people from all over the country, and they are. And look, some of them, they get nervous. Some don't play as well as you wish they did. And I know it's easy to sit at home and mock them and say, "Oh, I can't believe this stupid guy said that." these are great folks, and they put themselves on the line, and they're in an uncomfortable and unfamiliar position. And it's my job to try to make them as comfortable as I can. I think I do a pretty good job of that, but you can only do so much. Because you never know until the camera goes on how they're going to react.
Right, yeah.
But when someone screws up on our show, my first reaction is not to mock them. I really want to try to make it better for them because I know how terrible it can be. And especially these days of social media where anyone can get on there and just call you an idiot, So I'm surprised people want to be on our show because of the chance of saying something that's going to be, on YouTube for the rest of their lives.
And I used to hear
great
some
people. I love it.
I used to hear some wonderful words of encouragement, the truck stop food counter. Actually, nice words. And then I heard some vicious things, catcalls and things like that when people would make a mistake. Or, like you said, people that don't have the camera focused on them, and they've suddenly become the smartest person in the world, and they can handle this. But when that light goes on, it's a different matter.
It's a very easy show at home because, first of all, you are at home and you're sitting up with your feet up, and it's
right.
at home. Everyone else, the other people on the air, are doing the work for you. They're calling the letters and they're making the decisions, and it's always your turn. One of the reasons we don't have a tournament of champions on our show, unlike a show like Jeopardy, for example, is that the best player frequently doesn't win because we have a greater luck element in our show, the Wheel of Fortune, and if it doesn't do you any good to know the answer on our show if it's not your turn. I mean, there are a lot of people who just stand there and they're helplessly because someone else is controlling the wheel and not hitting bankrupts like they just did a moment ago. So it's a completely different game in the studio, and I always say to people on the show during commercials, you're going to be a lot more charitable to people when you go home and watch now because you'll know what they're going through.
Sure. It's the same feeling that I go through every time I watch a press conference, and I'm sitting at home thinking, no, I can answer this. I can do this. No, you need to tell the reporter this, and this. Show them. And no, it doesn't work quite that easily, I guess. Yeah.
Things are always easier from a distance.
Right. Well, I've got one last question. My most recent podcast guests have included interviews with a physician and a lawyer, and I've asked each of them what advice they would offer to young folks thinking about pursuing those specific professions. So I don't want to leave you out of the mix here. So what would you say, other than go lie down, to someone thinking about a career in the entertainment industry?
Wow.
Or would it be go lie down, or here, have another scotch?
It's a tougher business to answer that question because if you talk to 20 people who have been successful, you're going to get 20 dramatically different stories. Every route is a total. If I were to say follow my lead, drop out of college, join the army, work at a local station. Everyone has a different story, and it's not like if you want to be a physician, you have to go to medical school for X number of years, you have to intern, you have to do all these things. There is no path. What I do say to people who are I get people who are trying to get started or just getting started and how do I get to the next step. The one thing I do say is no matter what you're doing, and I think this, by the way, applies to any job, no matter what you're doing, and you may be working in a dinky little station in a dinky little town on the midnight to 6 a.m. shift, but you've always got to give it your best because you never know. I've had several career turns that happened because in an unlikely situation, someone was listening or watching and liked what I was doing. And I could easily have blown off that night or that day because it didn't seem to matter much, but it always matters because you just never know who's out there. You never know, especially in these days where with online presence and people can hear you from all over the country, you just never know. So it's always give it your best. But I would that's advice to me in any job. You got a job, they're paying you for it. I don't care what it is. Mm-hmm. You're cheating somebody. You're cheating yourself. You're cheating your customer. You're cheating your boss if you don't give it your best.
The very first interview that I did as a historian in the Air Force, first brand new historian, and I was interviewing the base commander, and I summed up the interview, not that question in particular, but he was philosophizing toward the end, and he said that's essentially the same thing. This guy became a 3-star general, lieutenant general, but he said, I don't care what you do. If you're pushing a broom or whatever it is that you do your best at it. You give it your best every day, and good things can happen.
And you know what? I admire people, and I don't mean this and I swear in any way, in any condescending way, but if I've been in situations where I see this, a busboy who's just, working his butt off,
sure.
and I'll admire that, and I'll give him something. I'll talk to him. I'll go to the manager and say something, because how great is that? I mean, he's not making a ton of dough, but he's taking his job seriously, and I admire that in any position.
Well, it's nice to be as quick to compliment as we are to complain as well. So.
Yeah, it is funny how we're all quicker to complain than we are to compliment, and sometimes it's a kind of a good exercise to occasionally reward something, or at least acknowledge something that's going well, because we kind of expect things to go well, and when they do, we just kind of float through it. It's when we get angry is when things go poorly,
exactly.
And then we all want to scream and yell. But maybe they'll go better more often if we do compliment more often.
Thanks.
Boy, I just sound like an old Cracker Barrel philosopher today, don't I? You bring this out in me, Dave.
It's the rocking chair. That's all it is. It's the rocking chair. Well, Pat, thank you so much for agreeing to be on this crazy little podcast here. It's been mad fun, and it's been great having you with me today.
Well, I enjoyed it. I always enjoy talking with you and seeing you on the rare occasions I get that privilege, and obviously reading you as well. So keep it up, and you're awfully smooth on the air, pal.
Well, gosh. Okay. It's the piano music. I'll blame it on the piano music.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Until next time, this is Dave Carter for Radio Deplorable on Ricochet.com.